Welcome to the webinar, 3 Pillars to Boost Your Employee Experience. My name is Eric Wallace with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, then we'll dig into our discussion. First, we'd like to thank Simpler for their partnership with today's event. They've been wonderful thought leadership partners to Argyle, and they're committed to providing you with valuable content and a great overall experience. Thank you again to Simpler. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please follow us on Twitter at Argyle Exec Forum. I also want to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on the feedback we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is very proud and protective of this policy, as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, please submit all questions that come up during today's event into the chat section of the interface. Before we begin our discussion, we'll have our panelists introduce themselves, then we'll begin the discussion. Paige, let's start with you, please.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Paige Leidig. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Simpler, and look forward to engaging with you during this webinar.
And hi, everyone. I'm Miriam Connaughton, and I run my own consulting business, which is focused on everything to do with the employee experience and the intersection of humans and technology in the workplace. Nice to be talking with you all today.
Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us. One of the things we do at Simpler that's really important to us from a cultural perspective is always take a moment before we start a meeting, start a webinar, start any type of engagement, either internal or external to our company, and take a moment to be grateful. Grateful for everything that's happening in our lives, everything that's happening at work, everything that's happening in our personal lives, and the connection between those two. Because what's really important to us, and hopefully it's important to you as well, is we firmly believe that when work is good, life is better. And how when life is better, work is better as well. And those interconnection of those two are so important to all of us in our lives. So please take a moment to be grateful. So the purpose of this webinar is really to focus on 3 pillars, and the 3 pillars that are really important that we believe to be focused on for the webinar. And one of the first things we wanted to get everyone kind of organized around is the definition of what we mean by employee experience. And so there's quite a lot of text on this slide, so I'll give you a chance to kind of read through it. But basically what we're thinking about, what we're focusing on, is that employee experience at the intersection of internal comms or employee communications and HR is a critical point in really understanding why that connection is important, but also what's driving that need for that connection. And what we believe is the understanding and the importance of connectedness, community, and collaboration can make a huge difference in the employee experience, whether it was pre-COVID, during COVID, or now hopefully as we're entering post-COVID. And that importance of that employee experience really can drive all kinds of different positive activities within your company, whether from an employee perspective, whether from an employer perspective, or whether from different personas or different parts of your organization, be it internal communications or employee communications, HR, or IT. And the interconnection of those really can drive a very positive employee experience if you focus on the importance of community, collaboration, and connection. And that's what most of this rest of this presentation of this webinar will be. And I'll be turning it over to Miriam to kind of talk through those 3 pillars. Miriam?
Thank you for that overview, Paige, and introduction. And as Eric said, please put questions as we go through and chat, and we'll make sure that we pick those up, if not through the conversation, then at the end. So, one thing, I don't know about you guys, but one thing I'm very grateful for is that all of these headlines that we lived through starting from March 2020, are shifting now, I think, from what I would term as we got very reactionary just by necessity. We all had to scramble in this mad, crazy experiment, didn't we, a couple of years ago, to suddenly figure out how to get more people remote than we'd ever imagined before. And, let's be honest, especially, those of us who practice in the HR and the human capital space, these weren't new trends for us. We can acknowledge that the pandemic accelerated a lot of the trends, but they were things that those of us working in the employee experience space were already grappling with. And I think the other thing is I talk a lot with my clients as well, that I hear a lot is we realize a lot more jobs could be remote than we ever thought possible. And we've got this whole conversation about hybrid and flexibility. And we realize that those jobs that were always deskless, that how we've maybe been underserving those roles, and realize that the support, the TLC, the connectedness, working really hard to communicate about very difficult topics, over the last 3 years, and that's not going to go away anytime soon. We realized that we had to do more, and that we had to reimagine how we deliver our employee experience. And all those fundamentals that HR has always invested a lot of time and energy in, quite rightly so, those don't go away. So how we imagine our total rewards environment, how we think about the learning and development experience, the importance of supporting leaders and managers to be the best leaders and managers they can possibly be. All of those things, those fundamentals that HR is very critically part of for most organizations, those don't go away. But the emphasis and the focus is shifting. And I think one of the things that I feel it's time for is we did get, as I said, very reactionary to the experiment overnight of moving to remote working. And it's a good time, I think, now for us to all step back and go back to our strategic thinking, which we've always treasured as HR practitioners, and kind of step back and say, well, what was driving all of these trends? Now let's layer in what we've learned over the last few years and then see where we go next with that. And just to scare ourselves a little bit about these mega shifts that have not gone away, I kind of group them into 3 categories. There's a lot going on that we need to think about, as we know. One is the talent challenges, which are huge. And, I think the conversation just leading into the pandemic, there was a lot about, AI and automation of jobs and how that was going to replace a lot of jobs. And over time, it will replace parts of jobs and parts of work that gets done, but it's still not going to close the gap that was built decades, if not generation or more ago. And those talent shortages, just to put them in perspective, I find this very sobering. So this piece of research done by Korn Ferry that kind of modeled out and said that by 2030, the global skill gap will be more than 85 million. That's just humans able to do what humans need to do in the workplace. That is about the population of Germany at the moment, one of the world's strongest economies. I mean, that is just significant. And there was an article I was reading last week. Canada came out and said that by 2025, which isn't that far away, they want to welcome 1.5 million immigrant workers for full-time Canadian citizenship around obviously key skills that they have shortages in, because they're building for the future and they recognize that they have a massive talent shortage at that national level. So these are huge, huge things that we're worried about. This is why, as we know, as HR professionals, that whole attraction, retention, engagement agenda has always been high on our list and has not gone away. In fact, it's become more critical. And then, of course, the working model shifts that were underway before the pandemic, they've accelerated. And now we were always dealing with a distributed workforce with different segments we had to think about differently. Now we've just got much more layers of complexity on that. And what we're going to dig into and talk a lot about is what's that rising to the fore that we always were concerned about, but now we need to think about more as part of our employee experience, that sense of disconnectedness. And we'll dive into that more. There's a lot of research around that. And just that kind of loosening the ties that bind us. I had a lot of my clients say to me, gosh, one of the things that really helped get us through this whole last couple of years was the strength of our culture. And that's really important. We know how important strong cultures are, but also concerns that cultural cohesion is being stretched and in some places broken because of how we're now working, because many of us hired a lot of workers during the last couple of years that have never experienced the office experience, whereas previously they might have. So there's lots of things that are causing that sense of disconnectedness to rise to the top of our list. And then last but not least, we're talking here today through technology. Technology, we know as HR practitioners, is a huge part of the HR agenda, that digital HR agenda. And, if I think back to when we first started getting excited about the possibilities, especially as the internet came in the mid-90s, of what that could help us do in delivering HR services. And for a little brief while there, the technology we were all experiencing in the workplace was better than what we had at home. And it was certainly better than what we had in our pockets. But that's shifted. And so our expectations as consumers of technology, as employees in the workplace, is we are expecting that enhanced, easy, personalized, digital experience that we have in our pockets with our smartphones. And so I think we're at a point, and it got tested to the limits again during the last few years, where that kind of degree, what we talk about as digital friction, can I find things, we've got all of these apps that proliferated in the last many years to help solve for point solutions, but they're difficult to find, they're buried somewhere. They're disconnected. And so that digital frustration is on the rise. We can see that again in the research. And, that sense of feeling that technology is there to help me be productive as opposed to hinder me. And hence, employee experience has always been about lots of things, including the technology that we use to solve for it. But the demands of technology now, again, have been amplified over the last few years. And we need to continue to work very seriously on that. And so,
are we seeing
yes,
are you seeing differences based on demographic shifts at all, or different?
Yeah,
demographics?
no, thanks for bringing that up. We've got the kind of bullet on the page. I think I gloss over that often because we as HR, we've kind of been talking about this for a long time now. As we started talking about the aging workforce back in the 90s, as the boomer generation were looking, we were seeing that bubble and that balloon of the boomers' retirement. But yeah, I think those demographic shifts, it's an important point to bring up, isn't it, Paige? Because, those expectations, I both love and hate these generational cohorts that we talk about because, it came from the world of marketing. But I think it has value to just, it's not rigid. We shouldn't look at it. It's not a black and white kind of, well, if you're this, you behave like that. Because I think there's more that is common in terms of the human experience than is, derived from what generation we were born into. But I think it is reflective of changing just expectations, kind of just the context in which we grow up shapes who we are and therefore what we believe and how we like to operate. And doesn't define everything about us, but it does kind of cause us, therefore, as employers as HR practitioners, we need to bring that into account. And as we all know, we've got, we talk about the multi-generations in the workforce. And, it's interesting now that, we started talking about the millennials coming as we were heading into the millennium. Millennials now are, more than half of leaders are millennial generation. They are that biggest in terms of, size of cohort, the biggest population of any of the ones that we talk about at the moment. And I think, Generation Z is already in the workplace. I don't know you, but I'm a parent of a Generation Z. And just as a parent, I can see, oh my gosh, he's entering the world, going to enter the world of work in a couple of years with a whole different frame of reference than I ever did. And I think that's exciting. But it's also, as you just kind of prompted, it's something that as we think about both our ability to attract and retain, we've got to be very cognizant of that. And I think the other thing which we do know to be true, it was starting to become true with the millennial generation coming into the workforce in big numbers. But now with Gen Z, that technology enablement, it's a given, as we know. And with the generation coming after them, which there's always someone out there who labels it. It's generally being labeled as the alpha generation. They will be coming through, those are generally children that are being born from the mid-2010s through to like the mid-2020s, so up to present day. Their first book is an ebook, mostly. They've only ever known. They are born often with a digital footprint. And a lot of Gen Zs were born with a digital footprint as well. So that expectation of sharing of information freely, of having technology at my fingertips that can do most of anything I wanted to do, it's a given. And so this whole thing about the digital workplace lagging behind, is also being fueled by this expectation shift because of the workforce that we need to attract and retain. And why? because obviously we all know that that's at the heart of good performance for an organization, but we also know that we've got to fight for our fair share, given the talent challenges that we have. So a lot of kind of, perfect storm elements that folks are talking about that we've been thinking about for a while in HR, but now we need to just shift our perspective a little bit and think, well, okay, all those fundamentals that we've been working on still matter, but what's different now? What has really been accelerated, and what have we learned from the last few years that we need to now also build into how we think about our employee experience? And one of those things, which I know is simpler with in your culture, you're very cognizant of and invest a lot in, is kind of just thinking about that this isn't just about the toll of the pandemic, although that is very relevant. And I think there's still a lot of kind of aftershocks and ripple effects of that we are yet to uncover and to deal with. But all of the last several years, but a lot of just the stresses and strains of how we live and work today are definitely taking a toll on employee well-being. And we know that a lot of things tie into engagement, and well-being is very, very strongly one of them. This is from a piece of research that Gallup did very recently, showing that 33% of employees are reporting that they are highly engaged at work. And when you look empirically at the data, and folks like Gallup have done this, and other organizations like Willis Towers Watson, who do a lot of this kind of longitudinal research, the core levels of high engagement have stayed pretty steady, which kind of surprised me a little bit when I looked at the data of the last few years. But what's shifted much more is more of us falling into that kind of disengagement, kind of the areas that are in the gray there. We kind of love the people that are in the orange. It's the people that are in the gray. And a lot of what can underlie that are things that, suck energy, that kind of drain our well-being. The stresses and strains of just operating in this kind of new world. Hybrid brings a lot of positives for us as employees. We know from all the research that significant numbers of folks are saying it's in my top 3 of why I would choose to be somewhere. I will leave if I'm forced to go back to the office. We've all seen the research around that. People are predicting some of that might calm down a little bit as time goes by, but I think fundamentally what the research seems to agree on is that our expectations of greater autonomy and self-direction as employees, and the ability to, where we can, work in a flexible way, that cannot be taken away. There's a behavioral economics element of that. Once you've given somebody something, you try taking it away, it's really, really hard. And so I think we're all agreed that that's here to stay. And I think one other thing around well-being that really strikes me as we think about what else do we need to be thinking about as HR. HR has, it is at our heart. We think about that physical, emotional, financial element of well-being. That's at the core of a lot of the programs, the great programs that HR designs and delivers to the enterprise. And I think much more now we need to be thinking about that kind of social element of it as well. We're practicing thinking about the emotional element. And I think that's stepping more to the fore, as we can see in the research and just from our own lived experience. And also the social element. And I think that speaks to what you were alluding to, Paige, of that sense of connectedness and how we enable our teams to collaborate effectively in the ways that we're working today. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more in a moment, because that sense of connectedness is extremely powerful. And I think it's a new locus of attention for us as we think about fueling high engagement in our organizations, which, as we know, we want to, because it delivers all of those important things that we care about. There was a piece of research recently that an organization called Better Up published, and they showed that in their research, it was pretty big sample size, 43% of workers said that they don't feel a sense of connection to their co-workers. 43%. That's huge. And I think we can all understand the reasons why. There's many reasons, but it's all the kind of reasons we've been living through. I was hired in, the last 2 years. I've never met anybody in person. I spend 8 hours a day on Zoom. All those things, that sense of connection. And it's not to say that connection can only be gotten from being in the office. I think there's one thing we shouldn't do is confuse organizational culture with being in the office. That's absolutely never been the case. And it's absolutely not the case as we think about culture going forward. But that sense of 43% not feeling connected to co-workers, I think that is something that, not just that single data point, but it's very prevalent, I think, again, in our own lived experience, but also the data is very, very strong and consistent on that, saying we have a connectedness issue, we have a loneliness issue, which is kind of the flip side of that feeling disconnected.
It's almost a feeling that Miriam, do you think that this has increased over the last few years simply because of the work environments that people are in today, right?
It has increased, and I think, going back to an earlier comment, it's certainly been exacerbated, I would say, rather than accelerated, but certainly exacerbated through the last few years, and it was trending before the pandemic. So if you look at the research done around loneliness just in life, a lot of the health providers do a lot of good research around this, like Cigna and Kaiser. If you're interested to go, they share it freely. And loneliness is as bad for you as smoking and being overweight, is what the health research shows. And this is obviously severe loneliness. We all have moments of loneliness, but this is people who say on a continuous basis, I regularly feel lonely. And loneliness is much higher when we look at the adult population. It's higher in men than in women. But it's actually significant in both men and women. And it's been rising over the last several years, both pre-pandemic and, as you've just said, Paige, quite rightly, it's been exacerbated for all the reasons, again, that we know. I mean, we talked about this a lot. It was a lot, rightly, in the news a lot about just look out for your neighbors, people who are living on their own. That whole loneliness piece was certainly exacerbated. But in the workplace, it's been exacerbated. So, what happens to us in life impacts how we work, as you said very rightly at the start, and what happens at work impacts us in life. So when we think about addressing connectedness in the workplace, we're not doing it just to be nice and be altruistic, although those are very good things to be. It's because we know that sense of well-being and connectedness to our colleagues, connected to the mission and the purpose of the enterprise, connection to my manager is extremely important, extremely important. And those ties have been shaken and loosened quite a bit over the last few years. So we have a job of work to do, which is why, this sense of building community, building more connection, I think is so important. Not to distract us from the fundamentals we still need to manage and run, but we need to amplify, I think, certain areas of our employee experience in a way that we haven't really thought about as much in the past.
Couldn't agree more.
And so, I've been citing some stats. There's so much research out there, isn't there? I mean, we all have our favorites that we go to. So I'm not going to belabor, but please ask questions in chat and we can come back to any and all of this later if you wish. One thing that really struck me is we think, well, okay, we're all talking about employee experience a lot more for obvious reasons. We all understand why. And up in that top left-hand corner in the orange box there, this was a piece of research that's done by Willis Towers Watson. It's quoted at the bottom. I would encourage you to go read it. It's a very good piece. But it showed that 92% of employers are making employee experience a top priority over the next 3 years. We can all say amen to that. That makes total sense to us. Yet, in that blue box, only 1 in 10, it's kind of flipped almost, the statistic, feel that they have an integrated EX business strategy and, importantly, the right technology environment to help them do what they need to do to transform their employee experience. So, that goes back to why I was saying, I think there's that kind of, digital lag is very evident in the research. And so we've got a job of work to do in solving for some new things like community connectedness and other things that are rising more to the fore. And let's be honest, technology does not solve everything for us. It can never solve everything for us. But given how we work, it's more important. And I think this research really brings that home. And then the other piece of it, which I've touched on already, which, I think we've just got to keep in mind is this, that desire for flexibility. And by the way, if everybody wants to breathe a little easier, I think the number one question I've been asked in the last 12 months from my clients is, has anybody sorted out hybrid yet? What they're doing on hybrid? And the answer is no. And I would challenge you to say you're being overly optimistic if you think you have. We're all still figuring that out. And it's a moving situation. And I don't think we're ever going to settle and say we're absolutely done and we now know what a hybrid model is. I think flexibility is the key word. And yes, do we need to amend our practices, update our policies, support managers to, lead better in a hybrid working world? Absolutely, we need to do that. But hybrid is here to stay. How we solve for it is still very much a work in progress. And, I think just continuing to share ideas about that is just the best way to learn across, the HR community does that so well. And I would just encourage us all to keep doing that. But it's that kind of balance of, we've got this flexible working environment. We've lost and are losing some things that we used to have delivered differently through more personal interaction. That's not fully coming back. So how do we solve for that differently? And yes, technology can help. It can't solve for everything, but technology's got to be part of that. And importantly, how we think about what we emphasize in our employee experience has got to shift. And if we don't, then we're going to be trying to impose an EX model for a working world that has moved on. And that dissonance and disconnect in terms of the espoused employee experience for us as organizations and what I actually experience, as we know, if there's dissonance and disconnect, like, well, we say we're this, but feels like that, that is where, a big factor in when engagement really starts to diminish. And so we all know the importance of keeping that congruence as best we can. It's always a work in progress between what we say we want our employee experience to be and aspire to be, and then our ability to deliver that and live up to that. And keeping that gap as closed or as close as you can is just that ongoing challenge for not only for HR, but HR is a huge driver and shape of that, but for everybody, like you said at the top of the conversation page, communications is a huge part of that as well. And that collaboration across communications, HR and IT, not exclusively, but especially, I think is quite rightly being driven ever tighter as a result of the last few years. I know for a fact, I was working in a large organization as COVID hit, and that collaboration between those functions just became daily in terms of solving for a lot of the EX delivery challenges that we had. So breathe easier. No one's fully figured out hybrid. So let's maybe get into some of, well, what might some of the solutions be? I think, again, we were talking about this pre the pandemic, this need to have a more human-centered experience, the kind of being more purpose-driven. We've all seen the research that show that, about 2/3 of millennials said, and it's largely being borne out, that purpose and alignment to purpose is a big reason for why I join and why I stay. It's much more of a given now when you look at the research, say for Gen Zs coming into the workplace. But that human-centered experience is always at the core and continues to be the core of how we think about employee experience. But it really has, and I think the last few years underscored this for us. We've really got to think differently about how we inspire people, because the context is very much changed and different. So how I get inspired, it's really harder, let's be honest, to inspire when I'm talking like this. It just is. But we've got to get better at it, and we've got to figure out how we help everyone, but especially our leaders and our managers, get better at that kind of inspirational element. We need to obviously feel supported. That's a huge part of high engagement. You've got that kind of emotional and motivational element of engagement, but that kind of enablement element of engagement is really important as well. So feeling supported in the workplace, whether it's supported through my interactions with my co-workers, with my manager, so that kind of social emotional support element, but also supported in a very practical way in terms of finding information, connecting with people that I need to get work done, and having the tools and technology at my fingertips in order to perform and be productive. And then, that connect me piece, we've talked a lot already about the importance of that human connection. And it's about the human connection, but it's also about being able to collaborate effectively, find information so that I can connect to the right people, and also have that strong, trusted connection with my co-workers, and also with my leaders more generally, and certainly with my first line manager, which we know, if you remember, it was a piece of important research that I'm going to forget how long ago it was done, but Gallup did a piece of research, you may remember, it was quite seminal, and the headline was, "People don't leave bad organizations, they leave bad managers." And, what that was based on, and I think absolutely continues to hold true, is about, at the time, based on them looking at their own data, 70% of engagement was explained by factors related to my relationship with my direct manager. And, I know from years of leading in the human capital space and looking at employee engagement research, those factors that explained engagement, huge amount of them continue to be about how my manager interacts with me, how they create opportunity for me, how they support me. And that continues to be really important. So I think that's one area in particular when we think about Connect Me. We need to really think differently about how we help managers connect with their teams as a collective and connect with individuals. And then, I think as you said in your opening comments, Paige, this isn't to boil it all down and say, hey, it's easy, everybody. If all we do is focus on communication, connection, and community, everything will be fine. We've still got all those other things about employee experience we need to worry about. But, the point that I'm making here is I think there's certain things that at different points in time we need to emphasize and look at differently and need to respond to in a more strategic way, because we are forever changed and will continue to change in how we live and work. And so I think a lot of that emphasis on how communication and connection and community help support us in how we do work today and how we live today. And we're going to dive into that in a moment. And I think the last piece of it, just to put a wrapper, if you like, that white wrapper, is, as I said in my introduction, I live at the intersection of humans and technology in the workplace. And I'm a great believer, I'm an optimist about technology for the power of good. But it's up to us how we deploy it and how we use it. And I think we just have a heightened need to have a technology experience for our employees that is more personalized, that is more kind of helping me feel engaged, feel inspired, find what I need. Takes away that friction I talked about. So it's kind of unified. We're always going to have multiple apps or tools that we want to deliver to our employees. But we've got to make it easy for them to connect, easy for them to find, easy for them to switch between one to the other. And that kind of seamless experience is what we're going for. And then last but not least, anybody remember the headlines that we saw kind of around the millennium and into the 2010s? It's like, oh, data's the new oil, big data. And I think that kind of, the smart element for me is I am still waiting for those real kind of insights and breakthroughs that really, as an HR practitioner, give us the analytics we need. And not just HR, obviously, but especially give our leaders and our managers and kind of those of us like our colleagues in communications and elsewhere, just give us smart analytics from the technology. Don't give us something that's too historical and rear view mirror that's, hey, this was engagement we measured 6 months ago, 12 months ago, do something about it. I need to know how people feeling today, this week. We just made a big announcement, can we get some sentiment analysis? What is people's digital experience? Can we get some insights on what are people finding? What are they using? Who's connecting? Who isn't connecting? Those kind of things that will give us those more predictive early warnings of how is our well-being trending? Is frustration on the rise? Those kinds of things that we can get out ahead of. That smart analytics layer built into our technology, is the nirvana. And thankfully, a lot of solutions are getting much better at that. But I think that's a given these days.
Yeah, I think a couple additional things here, Miriam, is that idea kind of in the center of this graphic is that human-centered experience and the importance of, and we've seen this trend growing, right? This importance of personalization.
Yeah.
And how much is the communication and the engagement targeted at me in my position, my role, my department, my organization within the larger company is all so important now to offset the connectedness and the need for community, and the importance of collaboration and communication is so important. So having a technology or having a strategy that focuses on a human-centered experience is so important today, much more so than
for sure. Yeah, and I think you hit on a good point about the personalization element of it. And I know people would make fun sometimes of the me generation and say, oh, it's all about me. Well, yeah, actually it is. So, we should be thinking about the me in terms of how we design, but we've got to do it at scale. So we can't go design our employee experience for every individual. So that personalization is so important because it's about show me what's relevant to me. Prioritize what I should be maybe looking at or reading. I think one of the blights of the modern age is time poverty. I don't know about you, but I feel time poverty a lot, in terms of all the things you're trying to juggle and get done. And, inboxes just became deluged, didn't they? I mean, I just gave up looking at my Gmail at one point when it said I had 35,000 unread emails. Now, we know a lot of those are kind of spam and marketing and things you kind of don't have the time to go and subscribe from. But we're just all getting bombarded. And I think that personalization element is so important for us as leaders as well as businesses, because we want to enable our people to feel engaged and be productive. And it's harder to be productive if I'm searching for things I can't find, if I'm reading something that I think is the current thing, but it's not, it's outdated. And I'm missing the main important messages that just came out about our new return to work policy because they're buried somewhere. Or, more strategically, I struggle to understand the strategy of this company and how I connect to it. Personalization is extremely powerful. And great leaders and great managers do a fantastic job on the one-to-one level of making things relevant to me and giving context. And that's critically important. But again, we need to do this at scale and we need to do it quickly. And that personalized element, enabled by technology as well, is critically important. And again, we know this in HR. When we started going online with our total rewards portals, and we started all getting excited at how about we could start to personalize that a little. And at enrollment, have something come up and say, hello, Miriam, welcome back. Fantastic examples of personalization. And we know how important those were and are. And then, and now we need to do more in terms of that personalization, because everything that we're dealing with as employees and as leaders and managers is just much more complex. Yeah, point well made. So we've got our kind of, I think of that graph a little bit of the dartboard of things that we're working on. But let's kind of just unpack those three kind of that blue circle of communication, community, and connectedness. And I know I'll take all the jokes from consulting, has to have things that, we either have to have a two by two in every presentation, or we have to have something that kind of starts with the same letter. So I haven't just forced it. Hopefully by now you are feeling and know as a practitioner, these things matter, and they matter more than they ever have before. And, let's just talk about each of them a little bit, and would love to get some kind of insights, through your questions as well. Feel free to share insights on the kinds of things that you guys are doing to address these things differently. I think the analogy for me, as I was thinking about kind of why we're talking about this and why we're emphasizing different things, if any of us went through the whole kind of period of, the heavy lockdown period with children being Zoom schooled, I know I did. I feel lucky that he's a high schooler. I felt for my friends who had, elementary age kids. I mean, that was just so crazy. But just think, we all know the downsides of that. Even though my son loved rolling out of bed at 8:29 for 8:30 start on a class, that aside, it was difficult. It was stressful. Kids, especially younger kids, lost out a lot on development. Well-being was really impacted. And, as thankfully, kids have gone back onto campuses, that joys of the in-person, even though my son would reluctantly say he enjoys the in-person teaching some days, he gets much more from it. He knows that, and he does acknowledge that. Just the social element, being able to have those normal relationships with his peers. Imagine if we were still Zoom schooling and said, right, all the kids that are Zoom schooled, stay home forever. You're going to have to deal with it, parents, people. You're going to have to deal with it, carers. You're going to have to deal with it. That would just be a nightmare, wouldn't it? And I think what we are doing with a lot of remote and hybrid working is to say, you might come back for 1 or 2 days, but by and large, you're going to stay remote. Many more of our workforce is going to stay remote. Many of our workforce was already remote. So that whole originally deskless cohort, and now what about us? Remember us? We've always been remote. So we've got to deal with that remote piece, knowing there's the downsides. We've got to kind of work on the upsides. So that analogy scares me. I couldn't imagine Zoom schooling continuing forever. And so this is why we need to go beyond the fundamentals and deal much more with communication. And I think let's just kind of maybe dive into some of these a little bit more. I think the communication piece, we've touched on some of this already. It's being able to bring clarity or help bring clarity, I should say, because again, how we solve for this from an EX perspective is through lots of different lenses, including the technology lens. But just making sure that, both that top-down element of messaging is very relevant and out there. I saw much more closer collaboration between HR and employee comms as we went into March 2020 for obvious reasons. We were joined at the hip. And, we were always good collaborators, but that's changed forever and it's never going to go away. And so that need to get the right messaging out in the right channels, but also to be able to, sustain that connection to purpose, to have people feel inspired by the work that they're doing and how it supports the purpose and strategy of the organization. We have to work harder at that because, again, we've always had to live with this hybrid world to some degree, but being able to have leaders come across authentically to build trust when much more of their delivery is virtual, it's harder to do that. And so putting more effort into how we get more rich experiences out of our communications is just absolutely critical. And, we think top down often as leaders in communications of, getting the messaging down. And it's obviously about much more than that. It's also about the stories we tell. And I think this links very much to community. I think I've worked with some fabulous and continue to work with some fabulous communication professionals who really understand how communications can drive culture. And I think that sense of building community, there's a really strong partnership between communications and HR around that in terms of getting out stories about our values and how we live our values, about our cultural heroes, the stories we tell ourselves in history, that oral tradition of the stories we tell ourselves are very powerful. So I think that, the intersection of these circles is very intentional to say, it's not one thing that's going to help us solve for how we need to think about our employee experience differently. But it's going to be a combination of things that we just try differently and try and practice some things that maybe we've done a little bit of in the past, or we need to do them more, or just some genuinely new things. So for it, let's talk about community for a little bit. One of the things that worries me in this kind of world of more virtual working, and there's been a lot of publication and research on this, is this sense of belonging is made more difficult, how I feel and the connectedness I feel, but how my sense of belonging. And we've got to really kind of work harder to make sure that, the progress that we are making, although still a long, long way to go from a DEI perspective, that we don't lose those gains in the progress that we've been making. And we've absolutely got to reimagine that differently, because again, there's been a lot of research already and there's more to be done in this. Looking at how people can get overlooked from when we're working this way, the have and have nots, the risk of the have and have nots between actual physical time in the office versus not being. And we sadly have saw in the research that, women especially were impacted by this. More of the caregiver, more of the Zoom schooling help was done often by female partners and carers. So, making sure that we don't lose that. There was some interesting research that I was reading recently about those of us who are working hybrid or fully remote, this shouldn't surprise us, actually get less feedback than if we are interacting in an in-person setting. And so as leaders and managers, we've got to be aware of these things, that the lens has shifted. So what do I need to do differently or work harder to overcome? And I think that building that sense of belonging and community is really important. How many of us did, I'm sure you did, Paige, I know you did, you did kind of the team Zingo, kind of Zoom bingo or happy hours, or, we all got, I think, a little overdone and overtired of those kind of things. But we instinctively as humans, why did we do those? Because we missed interacting on a more social level with our people, with our teams, with our co-workers. And, that human connection is so important to whether I trust you or not, to me knowing you more fully as a person, as a human being, so I know what you're good at. I know where you're trying to grow and learn. I kind of know how you might add value to something that I'm working on, that we can collaborate on. All of those things we have to invest in. And we do it quite naturally when we meet and we shake hands or we hug and we chat. It's much more natural, let's be honest. This, let's be honest, page is a little unnatural.
That's right, it is.
Yeah, and I don't know what one of the things that I find very unnatural, someone said to me, how weird would it be if we all started walking into physical meeting rooms together and put a mirror in front of us and looked at ourselves? It's weird, let's be honest. I can see myself right now and I'm like, it's just a weird way to interact, but it's here to stay. But how do we then build trusted connections and build community and a sense of belonging? The other side of it as well is recognition and feeling valued. We know as HR practitioners how important that is to engagement. You started out with the gratitude, which I love that Simpler does that. That giving gratitude, showing gratitude, appreciation, it is absolutely huge. And there's research around this, a lot of research around this. Gallup does a lot of good research on this. BetterUp, I mentioned earlier, they've done a good piece on social recognition. But we've got the financial reward side of things. HR, leads that, manages that, and then works with the business to deliver that effectively. We're not talking about that side of rewards here and recognition. What we're talking about here is that social recognition. And it's harder, isn't it, when we're working in this distributed world, to feel seen, to feel valued. Do people actually notice what I'm doing? There's a DEI element to that, because historically, and not just as, that we've solved it for it, but if you look at the historical research and just more current research on this, it shows often that, minorities can often in certain settings get overlooked in terms of the appreciation and the recognition, and have to work harder to get, to get that and to be seen and to be heard and to feel valued. And it's changed again in working in this way, working in more distributed ways, working in more flexible hybrid schedules that make it more difficult for us to connect in meaningful ways. And so we've got a lot of a tide there that we've got to work to overcome, so that we feel a strong sense of belonging, we feel a strong sense of being valued. And again, we do it because it's a good human thing to do, but we also do it because we know it fuels engagement, and engaged workforce fuels performance, and it's a beautiful virtual circle. I mean, I know you, it's Simpler, you guys do a lot of great community building stuff and work very virtually and do a lot of great things to work at this.
Yeah, I think the three last words in each one of these circles, the feeling of being valued, doing regular engagement, inspires people. It inspires them to be more productive, inspires them to feel like a sense of belonging, and inspires them to strengthen relationships not only with their peers, but with their managers and across the organizations.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. Yeah, and then these things very deliberately, as you said, they all interrelate. And I think that, that sense of connectedness, I mentioned earlier the piece of research that said, the BetterUp research that like 46% feel disconnected from their co-workers. We've got to do some very intentional things to fuel that connection. And, again, working much more in a hybrid way, there's a lot more asynchronous working. So, in the kind of olden days, as my son refers to my earlier period in the workplace, we would come into the workplace and you would be sitting side by side in Cubeland or in your offices or whatever. And, you'd come in and you'd do your kind of regular work day and you'd see people for a similar span of time. That's changed. And so that connectedness now, where it's asynchronous for a lot more of us. So I might, log on early and then I might drop off for 2 hours and then I might come back again for a couple. It's, that's why we've seen the proliferation of collaboration tools like the Slack channels that that asynchronous collaboration. And so when we think about connectedness in that world and how we build community in that world, it's quite different. And I think, as again, going back to my earlier comment, I think managers and the research shows this as well, is middle managers, as it's referred to out there in the zeitgeist, but really the kind of those frontline managers, between the executives, if you like, and the frontline workers, are feeling the biggest squeeze in terms of feeling more stressed out, feeling less supported to lead and manage in this world. And I think that's pretty self-evident when we talk about needing to work harder at overcoming the challenges and work harder at communications, at building community and connectedness. Not that that is singularly on the shoulders of our frontline managers, but a lot of it is, especially when we talk about the community of the team that they're leading. And so I think as we reimagine our employee experience and think about how we amplify these things better, differently, I think part of that has to be, yes, how do we support employees in this way better, differently? And how do we help managers? Because, going back to managers being, if you like, that they're almost like the secret sauce in a way of delivering our employee experience. We know this as HR practitioners. There's only so much we can do to design great programs and, try and get them out there and get them used and get the adoption and get them delivered. We know that we rely a huge amount on the skill and the adeptness and the empathy and the intelligence with which our leaders and managers apply those, whether it's through, performance conversations or recognition and appreciation, or just building trusted relationships and building those social connections, taking care of the well-being of our people. It's tricky, and we've just made it a lot harder. So I think looking at this through the employee lens is really important. And I think, increasingly, what I find myself doing and doing with my clients is looking at it through, and what do we need to do differently with that manager population as well? So we've got the 3 C's in our brains. They're all kind of seared in there. And again, I kind of said earlier, breathe easier if, you're sitting there thinking, oh, well, surely everybody has figured out hybrid. And no, they haven't. And, we're all a work in progress. I've said that already. And I think there's a lot of text on this page. I'm just going to highlight a couple of things. But going from left to right, we're all a work in progress. We're all somewhere on the journey of enhancing our employee experience. And whether we've got, we're just getting started, we're kind of starting to make strides, we're getting there, we feel like we're making appreciable progress, or we're high performing. What the research shows, and I've referenced this piece of research earlier, you can go, it's Willis Towers Watson, HPEX, high performing EX piece of research. And pretty much the getting there group is about 61% of companies say we're getting there. About a third, about 30% are in the middle, and only 9% are in that leading high performing category. By the way, it's not self attested. It's companies that over a sustainable period of 3 years have outperformed their peers in top quartile performance and have 3 years of sustainable high engagement. And so it's not self attested to. So 9% of companies are in that high performing. What distinguishes them is, I think, what we all strive for. They've optimized their employee experience. It's very aligned to strategy. They've got that human-centric orientation with that personalized communication element really strongly built out. They do that end-to-end employee experience design. They've got intelligent analytics. I talked earlier about the importance of that smart layer that we're all striving for. And they use EX technology specifically designed for EX, as opposed to if you're at the other end of the spectrum, usually you're scrambling, trying to knit a few apps together and, hope that it gives you some lift. It'll give you some lift. It won't give you that kind of lift off that you want to be at the high performing end of things. So this is partly to reassure you, we're all a work in progress. We're all somewhere on this journey. There is a rarefied, end of the spectrum that we're all striving for. But keep making that progress, and you will continue to see improvements in those things we care about, in retention, in engagement, and ultimately as well in the performance of our organizations. So I think we need to get to questions here shortly, Paige, don't we?
I think we do.
And so I think we can just kind of
there's so much to cover.
There is. We can put a wrap on this. I mean, you opened up with, when work is good, life is better, and that's really what we all care about. Is let's create an environment where everybody can flourish, so that people feel that I have what I need to feel connected, aligned. I feel supported, and I'm inspired and I'm engaged. And that's the reason we all get up, and those of us who work in the employee experience space, that's what we're focused on, because we know that delivers high engagement, which we know delivers the business outcomes that we're looking for, and the people outcomes that we all care so passionately about. So with that, I think it's probably good timing, is it, to start to look at some questions?
I think it'd be terrific.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Miriam and Paige, for that insightful presentation. We'd like to open the webinar up for Q&A from the audience and encourage attendees to submit your questions using the chat feature. So why don't we jump right in and start with the first question, which is, what's the biggest mistake you've seen companies make in trying to personalize their employee experiences, and how did they get past it?
That's a great question. I think I've seen a few things over my 30 years and counting of being in this space. I think one is you've got to be able to scale it. So, don't kind of create too many segmentations, too many cohorts that you then can't scale and manage, because especially, if you're in the HR operations space, you know what I'm saying here. You've got to be able to administratively scale it in a cost-effective way. So kind of being able to do it that way. I think the other piece of personalization is personalizing it, but then not focusing on the things that people actually care about, that they want personalized to. So use data, use analytics. So you can personalize the heck out of a lot of things, but if I don't care that today is National Pancake Day, I'm not interested. Whatever it is, personalize the things that you think are relevant, that will resonate, that will do something to inspire, to engage, to have people feel supported or a sense of belonging. So go back to the raison d'etre of why we have an employee experience. Personalize it about the things that people care about. Because you don't want to personalize for personalization's sake. Because let's be honest, personalizing employee experiences can lean towards being a little expensive. And this is why if you've got deeper pockets, deeper resources, you can probably do more in that space. But the rest of us have to survive wherever we are in that spectrum, from being a small, lean startup to a very established, Fortune 50 company. We've got to be thinking about being relevant about those things that we're personalizing. So I'd say it's those two things primarily. Don't fall into those traps.
Also, I think it's a journey too. I think sometimes people try to bite off too much too quickly. And so as a result of that, they misset expectations as they try to invest in employee experience.
Yeah, no, I think that's very, very relevant. Yeah.
Great, thank you. The next question is, we are struggling to build community among our employees. Do you have any advice for us?
Gosh, that's a good one. First of all, breathe. Everybody is struggling. So, in different degrees. I think, first of all, think about where you need to build community. And I know that sounds like a bit of an obvious statement, but there's the obvious communities we think of, like the team. So the functional, however we're structured or organized, you've got that kind of intact team community. How will we define that? But we all live in several communities in our workplaces. We live within, that functional team community, but we might live within a project environment, because we're all working much more yes, I have my job, but my job is more about multiple projects than it is in a traditional, I have these tasks I need to do every day. So I have communities of projects, the teams that I'm in. There's also, very importantly, I have communities in terms of my sense of belonging from an inclusion and a diversity perspective. So we talk about kind of employee resource groups, DEI communities, lots of different layers of community. So I'd say don't just fixate on one, because these things amplify. So if I'm having a bad day with my team, if I can go find my people and feel a sense of connection and community elsewhere, that can certainly offset, entirely, or at least to a degree. There's some fascinating research around this sense of community that, I mentioned about loneliness. If we have only one person at work that we consider to be a co-worker and a good friend, we are more likely to stay. We are more likely to be high engaged. We will have a higher sense of well-being. And so, helping people feel connected and finding community is so important. So I think about the types of communities. I would say the other thing is look at some of your practices. And some of this comes back to some things I mentioned about, helping leaders be more adept at this. When people don't feel a sense of community or connectedness, often they say, I feel I missed something. I was left out. I wasn't included. This goes back to, one of my clients said, we're getting much more intentional about the on-site work. So when we are coming in, we know it's a waste of time and effort if people come into the office and like you're sitting there on your own. and it's like one of the person down the hallway and you're like, but I thought we were coming in. You've got to get much more intentional in the community building about those in-person interactions. You know, one of the things my client said to me, which I thought was a good way of somebody, he said, on-site is the new off-site, which is, you know, the idea that we would invest often in these off-site experiences. Why? To build connection, relationships, trust, celebrate, all those good things that we do those off-sites for. But now he said, and we all get that, don't we? On-site is the new off-site. But what he meant by that as well is we should be more intentional about it. Don't just have people wander in. Have a conversation amongst your team, for example, in this example, where it's like, right, you know, let's figure out what's going to work. And let's make sure that every other Wednesday, whatever it is that works for us, that's our team on-site day. And it's not that you just wander in and then go to your cube or your office and shut the door and get on your Zoom calls. Again, waste of time. Be very intentional about what you're doing in that time. And then I think the third thing I would say is companies that are changing their policies to just make it better, easier to build community. And so that's kind of policies related to hybrid working practices, but also just helping practices give people tools to help build community better. Time is running out. We can't get into those, but I'm happy to take questions after the event as well.
Well, thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you so much, Argyle, and very, very much appreciate everyone who attended in to our webinar today around 3 pillars to boost your employee experience. And if you want to learn more about what Symplr is doing, don't hesitate to go to symplr.com and learn more about our focus on employee experience and how we think it's basically at the center of everything the company should be focusing on to enable their employees to work better and to have a better overall personal life. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Miriam and Paige, for this excellent presentation, and thank you everyone in the audience for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.